So welcome to the blogging masterclass. We're going to be looking through a couple of different tools and things that you can use, hopefully right away. We've got a little mission today, which is essentially to have a clear understanding of how our blog content supports our work and our businesses and our hobbies or whatever it is that we're blogging for. I'm going to show you some tools and things that I use and that we use in Content Club for sort of cataloging our ideas and how we want to what sort of questions and answers we want to be dealing with in our blog posts for our audience. And I'm going to show you blogging templates. So these are things that we can build once and use over and over and over and over again in order to try and turn our what is usually takes weeks and months to create nice blog posts and trying to get it done in just a few hours and so on. And then I'm going to show you how to build promotional checklists so that you can very quickly and easily get your blogs in front of lots of people. So before we talk much about like how to do your blogs and things, let's just talk a little bit about where they fit in terms of the overall body of content that you're working on and so on. So I always like to think that an individual piece of content by itself is successful or unsuccessful as it might be, doesn't really do anything for you or your business or whatever if it doesn't actually fill a purpose within a larger collection of content. So I like to look at things in terms of that you've got core content, supporting content, and promotional content. And core content tends to be bigger stuff that gets people to have some kind of data transaction or whatever, or even buy something small from you guys. And promotional content is this stuff like Facebook adverts and tweets and LinkedIn posts and stuff. And supporting content is the sort of sandwich meat in the middle, like your blogs and your video blogs and so on, things that people can regularly engage with. So we want to focus on the supporting content, the blogs today, and work out how they play their part. But a really important thing to take away from this particular point is that all of your content has to have a relationship with all your other content. So a blog post by itself is even if it gets lots and lots of engagement and likes and comments and things, probably isn't going to create much value for you long term if you're not thinking about how it connects to other posts. So do you have other related blog posts or videos or even sort of downloadable content that people can sort of follow a journey onto? Or do you actually have a collection of really good social media content that's going to support the success of that blog as well? In order to actually start thinking about what the purpose is of all of our content, but this applies to a really granular level like blogs and social posts all the way up to like our entire marketing and content strategy, is to think about like what's our mission statement that goes along with this. So there's a little model that I've built out around this, which is called the WOC model, WOC, WOC. And it's really good just to sort of spend an hour or so on your own in your notepad, sort of scribbling away and trying to come up with a few different statements that will help guide you. Because when you've got these statements in place that sort of say who you're creating content for, why you're creating it for them, and then what are you actually creating in order to fulfill that outcome, that acts as a really nice sort of compass or sort of true north in your strategy and your way of working that allows you to go, okay, well, if I'm going to create this, or if I'm going to spend a few days filming something or whatever, how is that actually going to help people long term? Does that fulfill my vision and fulfill my purpose as a content creator and as a business that serves people and so on? So the way that I approach this is that we just come up with 3 short sentences that create a statement, and we define who in the first one, and then we sort of say what outcome are we trying to help those people or that person achieve, and then what are we actually going to create in order to help that happen. So for example, for Content Club, we might say for our blogs, we might say we help content makers and marketers to build compelling and trust-building content by creating educational blogs and videos that they can't find anywhere else. So something like this, and I can go away and create I actually just wrote this morning, so that I could write a dozen of these and then go through and like circle the words that really stand out to me. And it's a really nice creative process to go through. And like I said, this can actually be an approach that you use for your entire business as a whole, in terms of how do you want to create a purpose statement for your business, all the way down to how are you going to use content, blogging, posting on Facebook, etc., in order to actually order to guide that and make sure that you're you're sort of avoiding risk and not creating waste and so on in your creative process, by making sure that every time you create something, that it somehow contributes towards the overarching purpose that you're working towards. So that moves us on to how do we actually come up with ideas, how do we plan the topics and the questions and so on that we want to create blogs about. So if we don't go through this process, what that ends up looking like is that we spend weeks and months scratching around, we come up with ideas in the shower and all this sort of stuff for great blogs or videos that we want to make, and then we never end up making them. We sit in front of our notepad and we scribble out ideas, but then they never leave the notepad. Or we just end up procrastinating, worrying that the ideas that we've come up with aren't actually very useful. That might actually, you end up feeling really anxious because you don't necessarily feel like, will anyone actually want to read that? Am I the most knowledgeable person to talk about that? All that sort of thing. So if anyone's actually done audience personas before or customer personas before, this is a really interesting exercise to do after that. So if you've created a customer persona, it's good to then look at that sort of person. If you haven't got those personas, just sort of think about it in terms of a conversation that you might be having with someone that you already work with, or even someone like a customer or someone that you'd really like to be your customer. Think about the sort of questions that those people have that you would like to be asked, or questions that you think that you have the answers for. So there's a couple of different alternative methods to this. In terms of market research, you can do traditional market research in terms of like doing surveys and going out there and getting people to sort of fill in sort of, survey monkeys or type forms or something in order to collect information about what your audience wants. You can go down the very sort of technical SEO route of actually sort of looking for search intent and finding out from various tools and things what questions people are asking online and where the gaps are. This is a really nice approach which actually that can sit outside of either of those things or complement it. And this is really what I think it's very person-centered and very human-centered in a way that you actually get to think about what sort of conversations are you having with your customers or the people that you enjoy working with the most. What sort of questions are they asking? What sort of questions are you asking? And how are you providing answers to those questions? So a really nice process to go through, just like you can see on the sort of topic planner in front of you, is to write down up to 5 questions that you think your audience may have. So for example, for someone that comes along to Content Club, these questions might be how to write great copy. Question 2, how to get more engagement, how to sell online, how to build an affordable website, how to choose which social channels to use. These are the sorts of questions that typically come up in a sort of Content Club environment. So I know that I can start building those into my content strategy and start creating blog content about those things. Then underneath each question, I can start writing ideas for headlines. And it's usually good to write between 3 or 5 for each question. So for, just as the examples that I've written here, headline ideas for how to write great copy could be using templates to improve your writing. We'll look at that a little bit later on anyway. Using call to actions more effectively, 5 new ways to get your blog found on Google. These are all things that I know about or people in the community know about, and we can create blog content about these things. And these don't necessarily have to be the headlines and titles that we use for blog content, but they can very much act as the thing on the list to create blog content for, and a really good starting point in order to decide the content that we create and how we create it. So this sort of leads us into the headline cheat sheet, which is something that Adam and I created. And this is when you're coming up with these headlines and when you start turning these headlines into actual blog content, things to really think about in terms of what's going to get the point of the actual blog post across, but also what's going to have that like real saliency online and it's going to capture people's attention and get them engaged straight away. So we've written a sort of 6-point cheat sheet, if you like. And the first thing is to ask questions and create curiosity. So to ask questions, the first way of actually approaching this is to always start every headline or a title with a what, a how, or a why. If you look through popular blog posts that you're reading, you'll probably see that they're like, what's the point in doing this? Or how do you approach building this? Or why should you use this and not this? And then if you can actually sort of generate questions that aren't necessarily obvious to answer, that then in itself creates curiosity and people want to click through, and that's either them want to learn something or they want to find out your opinion on that thing and so on. Using numbers and lists, obviously you've probably all seen list posts and so on. Quite often, if you're really struggling with the layout or a template for a piece of content, starting in list form is a really great way to do it, and then you can always turn it into a more sort of formalized structure, or a more sort of a richer structure later on. Or you can just publish it as a list post. And apparently using odd numbers in lists gets more clicks and likes and attention as well. The next thing is to set a really clear learning expectation. So where it says in the first thing about asking questions, that what thing is really important. So by reading the title to something, is it clear to the reader what they're going to learn by the time they get to the bottom of it? Because if you can't set that educational expectation, people just don't know what's in it for them. So always really question yourself, what are you actually going to teach this person, and is that clear from the title? The next thing is 10 to 15 words is a good sweet spot in terms of how many words that you should be putting in a title. If it's too short, people don't necessarily get the meaning and the expectation across. If it's too long, then, to quote Kevin Boyd, you confuse and you lose. And you don't want to put so much there that people don't understand that. And you want to, and that sort of 10 to 15 word mark is a really great way of just making sure you get one really clear message across. Point 5 is to use power words and punctuations. Power words is really important because these are the sort of things that grab people's attention and suggest that your blog post will have great impact. And then punctuation is important because it actually sort of breaks things up and adds a little bit more. Not only does it add the opportunity to have more understanding and sort of careful grammar in your posts, but also creates something more visual as well. And then the last thing is do empathize and do not patronize. And basically what this means is if your blog post is tackling a problem or a challenge or something, talk about it in a way that allows you to connect over that problem with the reader rather than criticizing them for having that problem in the first place. So I know that sounds a little bit ethereal and fluffy, but the two versions of that could be talking about, the way that you introduce a problem is a sort of classic thing that Adam and I talk about is isn't it frustrating when this happens and you get this and you can't get that and then the outcome is this, and I've experienced this a number of times, and the way that I've moved past it with myself and my work and my clients is by doing this. This is a much more empathetic way of approaching a problem and a headline than just going 5 reasons why you're failing to grow your business right now, or have you tried selling online and you put thousands of dollars into adverts and nothing happens? Is it because you suck and you don't know all the answers? If you've been looking around on Facebook at all, and you see these sort of we joked at the beginning about Ben and his 6-figure income training course, that's the sort of stuff that you're seeing, and that's the sort of language that you're seeing, and it very much sort of preys on people's vulnerabilities and not their sort of ambitions and their successes. So by using language that empathizes, we naturally bring people into our customer base, into our readership and audience and so on, that are already people that value the success that they've had, and that by working together we can build on that success rather than using language that preys on people's sort of vulnerabilities and so on. That's really important to remember and to sort of take a very conscious approach to. So the next thing is blog templates. So we've sort of looked at the purpose of content in terms of where does it sit in the overall strategy of promoting and supporting and core content and so on. We've looked at how do we get our ideas down on paper and then start turning that, using a process to push them through a workflow of creating blogs, if you like. So when we actually get to that creative process, we need to start putting shortcuts and processes and templates in place that allow us to create that content as quickly as possible. And I would urge all of you, the next time that you want to sit down and write a piece of content, not to do that, and instead see if you can create 2 or 3 templates instead. And that might take you an hour or 2, but it will, over the course of the next few months, will really increase your productivity around content creation and blog creation. So blog templates essentially look a little bit like this, and they give us positive constraints to be working with when creating new content. So these are actually real life templates that I use both in Content Club and for clients as well. I sort of break things down into, firstly, I define it. So I've got a short form blog template, which is typically used to share ideas and are good for sort of thought leadership type stuff, or making or educational type stuff around something that might be a new concept to the audience. Try and limit those to around sort of 600-700 words, something like that, and I define how many headings are in there, and I define how many calls to actions I'm going to have in there as well. And I order it like this. So I have an introduction, and I do a what and a why and a how in a sort of 20%, 30, 10%, 20%, 30% kind of format as well. The reason that I do this is it allows me to do two things. I can structure the blog in a way that enables me to explain the idea and the concept in the blog as clearly, as understandably as possible to the reader, but also it makes sure that it's got exactly the right proportions so that it's useful to the reader. So the reason that the how at the bottom gets the lion's share in terms of like proportionality of text and so on is because that's what they've really come for. You know, I talked at the beginning about in that headline cheat sheet around making sure that you set a really clear learning expectation, and that how section is the learning expectation that you're now trying to meet. So something like breaking that down into a couple of steps, or telling a story or a case study about how you've done it before with somebody else, whatever works. But this is the educational sort of meat, if you like, that the reader really needs to be able to take away and put into action. But that how needs to be precursored with some sort of explanation as to why it's going to be valuable to them. So we use what to explain the idea, and we want to try and get that over and done with as quickly as possible, but set the expectation for what they're going to learn. And that's, you know, for a 600, 500 word blog post, that's going to be no more than 100 words. And then we look at the why is this important? Why is this useful? Why is this going to help? And that's where we get to say, okay, well, the reason that you want to do this is because if you don't do this, the risks are this, 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 and this. And if you do this, then you're able to, you know, create this kind of value, or help customers in this kind of way, or save time in this new way, and so on. And just having this kind of template to work with is really good. So what you can do is create questions like, what is the idea? Why is it useful? How do you do it? And then you can sort of write your answers underneath in the word limit that you've created. And then you can go back and you can tweak the heading that you've created to be more appropriate to the title of the blog or the subject of the blog. And then whatever shape and size our content is, whether it's a Facebook post or a big long form how-to blog or an ebook or whatever, we apply the same thinking. So the next template that I want to show you is this long form how-to blog, and it's 1,200 words. It's got 6 headings in it. It's got 1 call to action and 1 call to conversation, which I'll show you a little bit more about later. And that's that kind of idea of, you know, this is longer, so we need to be able to create a few more headings and questions in it. Giving yourself, you know, if you just give yourself a heading and then say, write 1,200 words underneath that, you know, how are you going to know when you've written enough? How are you going to know what parts of that are valuable for the reader and which parts aren't? So giving yourself really, really short amounts of words to write. So you'll see in the middle of that template, it says 500 words, which is actually a lot to write freehand or freestyle. So actually breaking that up into bullet points. So actually it's, you know, 5 bullet points with 100 words underneath each, you know, is a much more palatable amount of work for you to be taking on. So these are really useful templates for you to get going with. So this blog template here, this is actually like, this is a more sort of material version of the short form template I just showed you. But for any of you guys that are subscribed to Content Club, I'll send this out afterwards as well. And basically, this is a really nice way of looking at the template, so that you can just sort of scribble in things underneath. So and you can see, like in the how section, I've broken it up into step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. So that's blog templates, and I really urge you to sort of, the next time that you sit down to start that creative process, is to start with this rather than try and start with the actual blog post or whatever it is that you're trying to create. And create 2 or 3 of these for you to choose from, so that when you're looking at the ideas list that you've got, and you're looking at that almost like it's a sort of a bookshelf or a catalogue, and you can pull an idea down, and then you can select a template that you think best suits that idea. And then in theory, if you've got a really good template in place and you're only writing sort of 100, 200 words a time for each section of that, you should be able to get you know, a good sort of 600 to 1,000 word blog piece done in probably less than an hour or so. And then all you're really doing is optimizing it, making sure that it's well written, making sure it's got good images in it, making sure it's got good sort of SEO optimization around it, and so on. So that's sort of templates. So we've looked at the purpose, we've looked at the ideation and capturing that ideation. We've looked at templates in terms of like getting the creative process more sewn up and more productive. Now, actually, like once we've published the blog content that we've created, how do we actually get enough eyes on it in order to make it worth our while and make it sort of fulfill its purpose within that sort of mission statement and journey that we looked at earlier? So the reason that actually putting some process around the way that you promote your content, and this doesn't matter whether it's blogs or whatever, but we'll look specifically at how to promote blogs now. But there's sort of two reasons for this. The first reason is much more sort of pragmatic and commercial, in the sense that you've created content and you've invested in that creative process. You may have even paid somebody else to create it for you. How do you maximize your return on investment on that? And the way, so having a really stringent process in place for making sure that you're promoting it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and using the channels that you have available to you allows you to sort of have a measurable and pragmatic approach to actually getting your return investment back on the creative process that you've employed. The second reason is actually a much more sort of personal thing, and it's more to do with your motivation around creating content, because something that I've seen loads and loads and loads of, even just in the Content Club sort of meetups and things that we do, is that people lose their confidence and their energy around content creation because they've spent weeks and months creating stuff, posted it out onto their website, only to see like 3 or 4 people engage with it over the course of half a year or something. And that's a really demoralizing process to sort of experience to go through. And the result of that can often be that you just give up, or that you procrastinate or whatever. And I suspect that a number of you, including me, have this feeling of just creating something, putting loads of effort in, and then not getting the response that you wanted, and that puts you off creating anything more. So we need to move past both these things. We need to move past not being able to measure what we get back from our sort of investment in creating content, and we need to be able to make sure that we're always creating energy for ourselves rather than taking away. So we have a promotional process, and for me what this looks like is a promotional checklist. And the promotional checklist can either be something that you create specifically for one blog or one piece of content that you've created, or it can be applied to a whole category of content. So let's say you've got a content type which is short form blogs, and you produce 2 of those a month or something. Having a promotional checklist for your short form blogs that you use every single time that you publish one of those pieces is a really great way of making sure that you're giving it the best chance of reaching engagement. So we break this down into 2 categories, or 2 columns, which is indirect and direct. So indirect is stuff that you're not necessarily, that's not addressed to someone specifically. You're putting it out into a platform and inviting people in to engage with it. So that might be something like posting it on Facebook, posting it on LinkedIn, or doing some sort of sponsored advertisement on Facebook or something like that. And we look and we create a task for ourselves in the checklist, which is, I'm going to post it on Facebook, I'm going to do it 3 times per week, and then once you've done that, you tick it off the list. Same, I'm going to tweet this 5 times a week, and when you've done it, tick it off the list. And at the end of the week, look back at your list and be like, oh, do you know what, I didn't actually get round to setting up that advert, so I'm going to do that before the month is up, and giving yourself that checklist to work from. The next side of the list is the direct stuff. So that's when you're actually sending it straight to somebody. And the really obvious one to go for here is email. So if you've got an email newsletter or something, are you sending out that weekly, monthly email newsletter? And are you including that blog in it, and you asking people to read it? So like, who are you sending it to? How many people are in that contact list? And how often are you going to send it? A less obvious thing here is actually something like direct messages. So if you've got a really good following on Facebook, or you've got a really good following on LinkedIn or Instagram, giving yourself a number of people to send that out to on that platform is a really great way of inviting people to engage with your content. And actually, this is how a lot of people are scaling their podcast content at the moment as well. They syndicate out their podcasts to people through their direct messaging platforms, and they say, please listen to the podcast, please rate and review it, and share it with anyone else that you think is going to is going to enjoy this. And that's proving a really effective way of scaling up podcast viewings quickly. So you might want to like just go, I'm going to send this to 20 people on my Instagram, and open up your direct messaging on Instagram. Get a little sort of templated message, which is, I've just created this blog post on creating great blog posts. I would love it if you could read it, and if you enjoyed it, share it with anyone else that you think would be that would find it useful. Lots of love, Toby. And and put that in your direct promotional checklist. So by having these things written down and in the checklist, you can be like, right, okay, I've published this blog. I'm going to make sure that over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to send it out on Facebook 3 times a week and Twitter 3 times a week. And I'm going to make sure that the week that I publish it, I'm going to send it out to my email newsletter list, and I'm going to send it out to 20 people on LinkedIn. And by having those to-dos in place, you're giving yourself a much better chance of success. Because without this, and this is the trap that I often fall into, I sort of sit there and I wake up, at sort of, 6 o'clock in the morning and go, oh God, no one's read my blog. Oh my God. And then I sit there, I get my phone and I just like, sort of like panic post it onto like Facebook or something, and then be like, oh God, hopefully someone will read it now. And then, 2 days goes past and no one has. And it's like, oh God, and it's because I haven't taken a planned approach to promoting this piece of content. I've just sort of made it up as I was going along. Cool. Right, I'm going to move on to the next thing, which is calls to actions versus calls to conversations. So this is how we actually get people to do stuff once they've read our blog. So we've probably all heard about calls to action, and that's going to be something like, if you have an online training course, or if you've got a subscription membership to something that you want people to do, or you've got an ebook that you want them to download, putting that link at the bottom of the blog. If you enjoyed this, make sure that you do this. How we sort of start to transcend that and start to thinking about how do we use the content that we're creating to actually build trust, build relationships, help us move engagement with content into something that might actually resemble more of a sales conversation as well, is to actually think about how do we create calls to conversations in our content. And this is less about getting them to do something that we can just measure and see whether they clicked through or whatever, or send them some automated email, and actually more about how do we actually use content as a bridge to building that new relationship with somebody. So this is often done really well when you're sharing your content on social media. So rather than just posting your piece of content out and go, check out our latest blog on blah, 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 what you actually do is you say, what do you think about this? We've written a blog post on it, and we're really interested to hear whether you think that we're on the money here, or whether you think we're off tilt or something, and sort of giving people the something to engage with, or asking people to contribute their questions or something. So if any of you have seen, or members of the Content Club group, what we do is we put polls out into the group every week or every couple of weeks, and say, okay guys, what are you working on at the moment that you need help with? Is it any of these things? And people click, and they, and then 12 people will select that they want to hear more about creating blogs. So we'll create a piece of content about creating blogs. And so just using, every time that you create content, asking yourself, is there an opportunity here to actually invite people to contribute to this content, or to ask a question about it, or to send me a message through the direct messaging tools or something. So rather than thinking about, even if you do want to do something quite transactional, like downloading an ebook or something like that, rather than saying, putting a link at the bottom, and fill in this form if you want to download the ebook, it could be, I've written this great blog post, I've also written a 10-page ebook on this topic. If you would like that ebook, just send me a direct message, or say yes in the comments, and I'll send it straight to you. And because no, you're not necessarily capturing their email address in that sort of traditional sense, but you are creating a connection with them on a social network that you can continue that relationship with. And there's more visibility, there's more transparency on those platforms and so on. So it's actually a better place to build a relationship with a potential customer with as well. So I just urge you to sort of think about the next few times that you're posting on any platform, is just think about, where are the opportunities here to create a conversation versus just passing people onto another page or anything like that. The next and final thing is to think about the collaborations that you can create around content. And, I mentioned podcasting earlier. The reason that podcasting is actually so popular and successful is because it supports collaborations between content creators. Rather than it just being one person creating a piece of content for their audience, it's now actually 2 or 3 people who have audiences of their own and subject matter of their own that they're experts in. And actually the act of seeing those people collaborate is an engaging piece of content in itself. And this can, in a blogging environment, this can just look like having a guest blogger on your website. It can look like doing an interview or a Q&A with somebody. Or it can look like just incorporating other people's quotes and videos and so on into your content. So, for example, we've got on the Content Club blog, we've got Adam Bastock, who's an SEO and digital marketing dude from Brighton. And he wrote a post in the Content Club Facebook group about tips for SEO tips for creatives and freelancers. And then we ended up taking that out and turning it into a full blog post and incorporating a video into it. And that's now on the Content Club website. This is good for a couple of reasons. A, it allows Adam to reach our audience. It allows Content Club to reach Adam's audience because he's naturally going to share that and so on his platforms. And also from a SEO point of view, you've now got 2 or maybe even 3 or 4 websites now pointing at each other and supporting the success of each other's content. And things like Google and so on are going to see that and be like, oh, great, there's, here's a couple of different websites that see value in each other's content. Let's increase our how much we value and rank that content. Yeah, so those are the sort of tips at the end there in terms of actually sort of, the promotional checklist, if you like, is the process that you should be following in order to promote your content. And then there are obviously things that you can bolt onto that. So making sure that your calls to actions and your calls to conversations are well thought out and also support that overarching purpose statement that we created earlier and so on. And then the final thing that obviously hasn't been mentioned here is repurposing content. And if anyone has tried repurposing content before, that's basically looking at pieces of content you've created in the past and then trying to get as much value out of those as possible by chopping out bits and pieces and putting those into new social media posts or smaller blogs and so on. And just to do a little sales pitch, that's why we created Poster. So if you go to Poster.works, that's a platform that you can then upload your blogs to, and then you could select which pieces of content you want to create them into from an online store, and you can just order your content and it arrives in your inbox in a few days' time. Exciting. If anyone's got any questions about that, just drop me a message and I would love to show you how it works. And that is the end of our little training course on blogging. I hope that was really useful, and I appreciate that I went through everything very quickly.